All right, we're live. Yeah, I got back a few months ago. Um,
Crazy.
yeah,
So you guys didn't play, or you?
no, season was good. The season's still going. I blew my other Achilles,
Oh
so now
shit,
I'm just
man.
back for rehab. Yeah,
Damn.
yeah,
Sorry, can't catch a break.
yeah. Shit happens.
Yeah, yeah. Damn.
Yeah. What about you? Where are you at? You're in Toronto right now.
Yeah, I was yeah, playing in Greece. We played two exhibition games, and then the um the whole country went into lockdown.
Hmm.
So me and my girlfriend just pieced out. We thought I was going to be back in like January 2nd or 3rd or something and play, and then still in lockdown. And I think that the season is officially cancelled, but every time I try to translate stuff from Greek to English, like I'm never sure if it's like the actual translation, you know?
Yeah, Kendra, a girl that went to TRU, she got a contract in Greece. Went there for, I think she was there for 2 weeks or a month, and then flew back because they said same thing. The season might start up in January, so she flew back because it was mid-November, and then was intending to fly back. But yeah, it's just the lockdowns continued, and now they've canceled the season.
Yeah, man. That kind of makes me feel better at the same time. Like, who cares? I was pretty grateful just to see Greece and stuff.
Yeah,
But I was a little disappointed. My coach was overly optimistic, but at the same time, it doesn't really help me because I'm trying to plan my life, and like I love volleyball. And I told him I'll come back if we're playing, but he was kind of getting me, trying to prep me for next year, which was never the plan to play there more than one season.
right. Yeah,
So yeah, that's where we're at now, and we're actually planning to move to New Zealand for a little bit, live
cool. What?
COVID free for a bit.
Yeah, what's so that is that the major call to New Zealand is COVID free?
Oh, dude, I miss my family. I miss New Zealand. Like, I got family in Australia. My little sister just had a baby, so hopefully by then New Zealand and Australia will have somewhat of a travel bubble, and
Hmm.
I can go and help out and see the baby. But I just miss New Zealand, man. Anytime, well, for a bit, anytime New Zealand was in the news, it was like a majorly negative event. Like, there was the there was the mosque shooting, and then there was the earthquake.
Hmm.
But lately, anytime New Zealand's in the media, it's look at how well, like, look at this huge festival that New Zealand's having, and
Yeah.
I haven't been back in 5 years, so it's about time.
Wow. So you haven't been back since you started going to state and playing volleyball.
Yeah, my first year at state, I went back to Australia. I lived in Australia before I moved to Canada,
Hmm.
and I just went back for Canadian summer, but to Australian winter.
Right.
And just to save some money, it was the biggest mistake. It just sucked being back and just working and being in 3 winters in a row.
Yeah.
So, and it's just such a long flight, man. It is. That's why a lot of people, vice versa, like, you fly to Canada from here, from New Zealand or Australia, and you just stay.
Yeah.
And a lot of Canadians will just stay in New Zealand because
Hmm.
it's just a bitch to fly back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Ever since I was a young lad watching Lord of the Rings on my sick days, I've just always wanted to go to New Zealand. I was before COVID, I wasn't sure if I was going to go play volleyball, and that was my plan was to pick up a working visa for New Zealand and go over there and live there for a year.
Yeah, it's impossible to get it now, but
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nothing.
I think
Nobody
you'd love
offers a
it. I
visa.
think you'd
Yeah.
love it, man. When you're there, obviously, everyone wants to get out of their hometown
Hmm.
and see the world. And I don't know if it's kind of like a grass is always greener on the other side, but I miss all the pros of being in New Zealand, like the people, the culture,
Hmm.
even even just the politics. Like, like this whole pandemic thing. Obviously, New Zealand handled it really well, um, and I think probably that's the biggest effect would probably be how the government responded. I know obviously it's a little easier being a smaller country, but um, people there generally trust the government
Hmm.
compared to what I've seen. Obviously, in the States, something else, but even in Canada, the trust that the powers that be um, have your interests is a little different.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think that would you categorize New Zealand as a more collectivist culture? Because I found a similar thing in Denmark was they were a lot more collectivist than we are as individualistic countries, and in that way, they first thing that masks were mandatory inside, everyone switched like that. It was just so fast, no complaints, wasn't a big contention point. It was just okay, we have to wear masks.
Yeah, I do think I think obviously America is probably like the quintessential individualist
Yeah.
country.
Hmm.
And I think it all has to do with history and the setup of the government. Like even I think the way New Zealand's government set up, and to be fair, I haven't lived in New Zealand in uh, 8 years now, maybe nine,
Hmm.
9 years, and I was never in the politics or government stuff when I was there. But I think Americans would classify New Zealand as like a socialist country, especially stuff
Right.
that I'm seeing in the media, like things that we don't even argue on. Um, I see being argued in the States, like, sometimes violently, like healthcare
Hmm.
and funding for schools and all that good stuff. Um, even topics like abortion and um, guns and stuff. It's just not even like we're just past that. I don't
Hmm.
if that's even the right way to think of it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The I know that abortion's like a big area of contention, and Poland just made it illegal to get an abortion. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Insane.
outside of rape, outside of
Yeah.
conception by rape, I believe it's illegal in Poland now. Um, and I was reading this book called Robert Sapolsky called Behave, and he talks about the how a micro, I guess a macro decision can have a macro impact as well. And one of the examples that he cites is, I want to say it was in the Belarusian area of Europe, more eastern, like Central Eastern. I'm maybe Romanian. I'm not 100% sure. I'll look it up after this. But they made it illegal, and this was in the 18th or 19th or 20th century, and they made it illegal to get an abortion before your fifth child. So after your fifth child, you could get an abortion. And the result of that was that they had to industrialize and basically make warehouses for orphans because so many people would just drop their kids off. And as a result, all of these kids grew up with these deficits because they weren't held as children. And that sparked a American psychologist named, no, not Maslow, Harlow. And he came up with all of these experiments where they would put two pseudo mothers for a chimp or a monkey, and one of them would be nice and warm with a linen cloth, and the other would be just chicken wire mesh with food.
Oh,
Because
seen that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, because the main idea was that from this Skinner behavioralist perspective was that all a baby wants is nourishment, and it wants the positive reinforcement of the food because that's going to keep it alive. And they found actually the opposite was the case, is that the children would go for the terry cloth mother over the chicken wire mother because it provided warmth. And I mean, the experiments this guy did were super duper insane and sad to read. Like, these monkeys would be scarred for their entire lives, and the only thing that could fix them was actually younger monkeys that hadn't hit puberty. But it was interesting because of how detrimental that small decision was. Not a small decision, but that governmental decision of limiting access to abortion resulted in this huge increase in orphans, and they had mental issues going forward. Their brains didn't develop properly, they weren't socialized properly, so many children just die in the cradle if they're not touched. And so it's interesting to see how we've now gone forward with this information and people still make, I believe them to be irrational, largely in Poland. They're super duper religious. So I understand it from that perspective, but it to me seems like such an irrational decision because of the impacts that it's shown in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I agree. It's insane to me that that's still, that it's still a contentious area, because obviously it's not something you'd want, is abortion being the first the first line of defense.
Yeah.
Obviously contraception and IUDs have made a huge up and coming, and that's really amazing, and we should keep on going forward with that. But it seems like the best answer that we have right now to that question of how can we maintain society. And I mean, I even hear this with like with the 5G Bill Gates thing, and how Bill Gates is trying to cull the population. Like his main idea initially, you can go back and watch his interviews, and he his original plan was how do we maintain, how do we make quality of life better for everyone. And what he found was that without contraception and without access to abortion and these things, people would end up having multiple kids. And that it was the same thing with vaccines. If we didn't have vaccines, then a few children would die throughout the course of a mother's life. And so people would have 11 kids, 10 kids, because only a few of them would survive. So his whole philosophy was limit the amount of children that we need to have to start a family and to cultivate a family unit into the nuclear family, basically, so that each kid can have access to all of the resources that they need to develop properly.
Yeah. You you touched on a few things that sparked a lot of what I've been reading and thinking about, um, in terms of racism. Um, and it's actually one of the reasons that, probably the biggest reason I want to talk to you, because I'm like, am I going crazy, man? Like, do I have all these conspiracy theories? Like, have I figured it out? But I um, reading into the history, and to be fair, I've just had a magnifying glass on North America these past few months, this past year, actually. The BLM movement has really struck like some hyper awareness in me, that around anti-Black racism, particularly. Um, and what you're talking about with the history of abortion and stuff is that, like, it was a structural problem. It was government policy that was put into society, if this is making sense, and that in turn has changed the minds of people to think that abortion is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let me even just rewind all back to the creation of race. Like, it's a completely socially constructed term, and it was actually kind of an economically constructed term. Now, I don't know. There was a scientist who coined the term race, and I think there were, at the time, but depending on which scientists you talk to, there was like this hierarchy of races, and there was white, it was like white, Asian, Black, and maybe, and when they traveled to America, they had like the indigenous people that had their own class for them, right? And that was this hierarchy. And but it all stems from the slave trade. Like, the word slave actually is rooted in Slav, the Slav people, because they were the slaves in Europe, and then they opened up trade with Africa. And so when ethical questions arose around slavery, these the term race, like the term of race was coined to say, like, look, there's this hierarchy of people. These black people are lesser than. Basically, it's okay to they're savage people.
Mm-hmm.
There were some scientists who claimed that that because of the hot climate, they uh, developed savage culture and this dark skin, and that Europeans were where all humankind began. That was the kind of assimilationist theory, which is pretty funny, right? Because we now know we all started in Africa.
Yeah.
It's kind of, but in any racist policy that you look at throughout history, it's always rooted in self-interest. So this slave trade that was created was very lucrative. They made a lot of money trading slaves. So they needed a reason to keep doing it. People were questioning it. So that's how this was started. And I actually think that the original definition for racism or racist, racism was the belief that there are races, and that each race is owed certain privileges in society, economic privileges, and so on. So if you carry on through that, there were, if you move to the abolitionist movement in the States with what's the bro's name? Abraham Lincoln,
Mm-hmm.
right? Did he want emancipation because of the good of Black people and the good of mankind? No, he wanted to win it was politically, like, it made sense politically for him to push that because that's where the North was headed. And cut me off at any point if you have any objections or anything. But Lincoln himself said, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, that, like, the slaves should be freed, but don't get me wrong, they don't deserve the same rights as white people. They shouldn't be able to vote, or, like, he was quite progressive for his time, but progressive then was, yeah, I want these people freed, but I don't think they're equal,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so again, like, just self-interest. Like, he wanted to win the war. It just made sense for him to be on that side, whether or not he had those views. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, like, we have this idea right now that hate and ignorance is the root cause of racism. Me calling someone a racial slur. But in actual fact, if you look throughout history, this has been caused by discrimination out of self-interest for a small group of people. In North America, it's obviously been very rich, straight white men who are usually Protestant, religious. And that in turn, they have created these policies that have in turn created this ignorance and hate. I mean, it's not the views of the people. It's kind of a top-down process.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's making
So
any sense.
I know it was a tough moral area, I think, for Lincoln, in that obviously people shouldn't be slaves. That should never be a thing. I think that there are three general areas where people should have autonomy, and that's in controlling them. That actually, no, just generally that you should have autonomy. People should have autonomy. And Lincoln was at an area where he was making a decision between slavery and the US economy. Because, as you said, the entire United States economy, and to a smaller extent, the areas outside of the United States, because obviously the slave trade extended into Canada and south into Southern America. And he had to make a decision between an economy and a people. And he actually tilted back and forth quite a bit in the Autobiography of Frederick Douglass. Frederick talks about it a few times, where he sat in on meetings, and Lincoln gets incredibly frustrated a few times because he keeps going back and forth. I assume it was the people around him as well that were pushing him to that, but he wasn't this absolute beacon for hope that he's made out to be now. There were even a lot of initiatives to move people and to reassimilate people into the Congo and to different
Yeah.
parts of South America.
Yeah.
He was going for that, to try to move people into these other areas so that they could recolonize. And there was also a large movement through the Civil War of recolonizing Africa and sending African Americans back, because it was thought that, okay, they've made our economy now, and we don't really have a need for them if they're going to be free. So that was the philosophy there. And I do believe Lincoln was way ahead of his time as a progressive, and as a part of the Republican Party. He was this beacon for hope for the African American population. And I know that Frederick Douglass and him were very close, especially towards the middle of their relationship. Throughout that entire process, they were really, really close.
Yeah, it's fun. Like it's kind of like a philosophical question of moral objectivity. Like, can you put today's moral compass back then? And I don't know, but it is fun to do it and look back, and especially the way we put all these people in American history on this pedestal, and then you look back and all these people like had slaves and stuff, and no wonder black folk are wanting these statues pulled down in the States. Like I actually wanted to pick your brain a bit, because you spent some time there. Where were you staying and when COVID first hit?
In Phoenix. I'm even here now. My mom has
Oh,
a
yeah.
pool, so it's a lot better for rehab.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Like you were mentioning to me that being in that area and seeing other perspectives on things kind of pushed you more towards the center. Yeah, like how do you feel like you're not free to express that?
I think naturally I'm very liberal. Like I think my natural tendency is quite liberal in personality and political views. What really started to push me more to the center was watching the media in politics, and seeing how much each position of the media twists the story. So what I started to notice more and more about the Liberal Party was that the majority of media is liberal. The majority of, like, all media, I would say. If you go onto Instagram, the majority of it's liberal. If you go onto TikTok, the majority of it's liberal. And they become these echo chambers really fast, because if you find any right wing niches, then you gravitate towards it super hard. So I personally try to watch both sides of the aisle, and like my YouTube, I try to control the algorithm so that I'm consistently watching both left and right. I think that in America especially, there's a huge silent majority, and what's inevitably happened is that I believe it's due to the media, and that left wing politics are so prevalent in what we see every day. And you even see it with cancel culture, and how people, if you say anything that's not in line with a left wing philosophy of progressiveness, you can lose your job, your entire livelihood can be stripped away. So more and more, the right wing people are starting to become silent, 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 but they still exist. Like there's no, and people keep getting pushed further and further away from each other, and it doesn't seem that there's any type of reconciliation between the two. Is that they keep getting further away, and there's not necessarily an idea from the left to bring people closer in, and there's not really an idea from the right to bring people closer in. And that's kind of a scary thing, is that they keep pushing each other apart and pulling each other apart. There's no real push or pull to get back into line with each other, where we can have some kind of middle ground decision. But it's really an othering and an enemying of one another, which I find really, really scary. I'm not sure how that's going to play out in the next 4 years, 5 years, but it's freaky to me.
Do you watch any Lex Friedman?
No, I've
Okay.
heard of him. I've seen a
Yeah.
few. I've seen a few clips, but I haven't gotten into him.
I haven't watched any full. I watched one full episode, and that was his name's Carl something, and he's the head of computer science at Georgia Tech,
Mhm.
and they talk. I think Lex is all AI. I think he does something at MIT or something, but then they got into the topic of race. But Carl because Carl is black, and he talked on his experiences and stuff. And I'll send you the link to it. It's a good talk.
Mhm.
But he mentioned this there's no Venn diagram right now with the two sides that you're talking about.
Mhm.
And he said, if you can somehow bring these two circles together, just to have that Venn diagram there and get them speaking the same language, um, then maybe something can happen. But he mentioned, like, one of the big problems is that they're speaking different languages. These two data sets of people are using the same. Well, I interpret it as they're kind of using the same words to mean different things, or like. So I'm kind of like you. I really try to see the other side, and
Mhm.
sometimes I get a little too deep in it, and then I have to get off Reddit for the day. like,
Yeah.
I get too far into the right, and I see this like just outright racist, homophobic shit, and I'm just like, and I'm like, I can't go to sleep now.
Mhm.
And but I do, like, you see the, like, you have to try and stay objective as objective as you can. It's just really hard right now.
Mhm.
I'm staying with my girlfriend's family, and we're at a dad's house right now. And every morning he puts on CNN, and then on his Alexa thing, and then he'll play Fox News right after.
Mhm.
He's kind of the same way, right?
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, you can kind of put something in between.
Mhm.
But um, for me, you, and Reagan's dad, who actually put an effort to try and stay clear-headed, it's actually a lot of effort to do, and the average person does not give a damn about doing that, right?
Yeah.
Like, something has to, again, whenever I think about all this stuff, it just comes back to policy and power, and that includes the media. The media a lot of has a lot of damn power. When I've been thinking about this stuff, it's all been, when I think of policy or government policy, right? And again, my magnifying glass has been on racism in North America, but I'm really starting to look at how much the media has a huge impact on our views and stuff. That I so I've listened to a couple opposing views to mine, like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, two
Mhm.
big, very vocal people. There was one other guy, and I can't even remember what his name was, but he was talking about illegal immigration from Mexico.
Hmm.
And this woman spoke up at the event, and she was talking about systemic racism, institutional racism, and his argument against it is he's like, I actually think it's racist to say that, like, his argument is free will,
Hmm.
that it's racist to say these people don't have free will to make their own decisions. I just can't wrap my head around that. Like, well, free will is kind of philosophical debate in itself, right? But I can't wrap my head around the idea that people are free to make their own choices in the system that we live in. Like, I think people are just people, and you put them um, into these societies, and they will make decisions, but within the opportunities that they have.
Hmm.
I don't know what you think on that. But
So, so the way that I see, there's so much turnover in, if we're going to talk economic means, there's so much turnover in the top and bottom. Like homeless people, the majority of the time don't stay homeless for their entire lives, and the people at the top, they don't stay at the top for their entire lives. Like there's so much turnover within our economy that it's really tough to say that homeless people in general are being held down and aren't being given opportunities. My philosophy, and I think this is a hill that I'd be prepared to die on, is that it's hard to say no to someone that has more skills than you could hope for. Like if someone has all of the skills that you're looking for in an employee or in a captain, then it's really difficult to say no to them because of any morsel of their race or anything along those lines. More and more people from minorities are skyrocketing to the top of their particular dominance hierarchies because they work unbelievably hard. And I forget the first thing that we were talking about there, but I wanted to say something about that. But I really believe that if people work hard, it's tough to say no to someone that works hard and puts their life on the line every day to, or puts their future on the line every day to learn and become better at something.
Well, you have touched on a great thing that I've been thinking about as well, and um, I I somewhat agree. Where I disagree on is that we kind of the myth of meritocracy, and there's, let me use Obama as an example.
Hmm.
Um, for a black man to become president, and I won't compare him to Trump because you can't compare anyone to that guy, but look at any president in the past, and to be honest, I don't have that great of knowledge of um, American presidents, but Obama had to be extraordinary. He had to be absolutely perfect
Hmm.
to be black and become the president. And the biggest two scandals, personal scandals that he had, was one, his birth certificate,
Yeah.
which I think came out of that, and two, he wore a tan suit once. Did you ever see that?
No.
He wore a tan suit, and a president's never worn a tan suit before.
Really?
And there's all these clips of right wing media just like scandal, like
Yeah.
Obama with, and then it's hilarious, right? But
Hmm.
um, I think there's a huge. I'm actually looking into this with sport and luck and success,
Hmm.
and some good examples, which you might already know in sport. In hockey, like 60% of NHL players are born in the first 3 months of the year. Have you heard of this stat
Oh,
before?
right. So they'd be
Probably.
playing. So then they'd be playing down with the
Well,
lower division or with the lower age
also
group.
when they're, yeah, when they're kids, the kids, the hockey season, I don't know, whenever it starts, it lines up so that if you're born at the start of the year, by the time your season hits, you've grown that much more than the kid who's born at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so those hockey players don't probably work as hard as these December kids, but they've just been given more opportunity because they happen to be more grown at that time of year. And the same data skew is in European football, I think, as well. Another like fun stat is seven out of the 8 world records for sprinting. They all had a tailwind behind them at the time. Obviously, these sprinters were talented enough to win and to be fast, but that tailwind got them the world record. So let me put that into a racial perspective and this meritocracy kind of thing. Work ethic is really important, but when you add in racial prejudice, it does make it that much harder. And I know there's been studies, and I'm sure there are studies that have gone against it, but putting a white name on an application, it's much more likely for you to get and stuff. And maybe from a personal perspective, man, I was a little shit in high school. Like, I was actually such a bad student and such a bad, dare I say, I was a bad person sometimes. Like, the way I treated my teachers, it was insane. I had problems at home and stuff, right? You act up. But what I saw from, I'm half Tongan, half white, and even just the discipline in high school, from what I saw to my full Islander friends, like, I didn't get suspended or anything, but for the same like whatever we did wrong, the same crime, we got different punishments. And let me go back to this extraordinary the extraordinary Black person. Black people have this there's this myth that for you to succeed, you have to be extraordinary. And movies have done a great job of instilling this into those communities. And maybe let me preface that both of us aren't Black, and maybe talking on, we can't talk from a personal perspective, right. But The Blind Side is a great example, and I know it's been quoted in a lot of anti-racist books, but it's like a classic example of you can't get anywhere without the help of a white person. And B, for you to get anywhere, you have to be an athlete, a great athlete, or you have to be extraordinary. I was talking to my buddy who grew up in the States, and we talk about this stuff all the time. And he was saying, like, it's actually negative for the hood when they see all these extraordinary Black people, because it kind of makes them think that's what I have to strive to be, to get out of my situation. Yeah, so I agree with you. Working hard is important, but there's a huge chunk of luck in there. And yeah, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think nobody really wants to hear that it's both. It's really inconvenient to hear that it's both of those things, because you're 100% right. There are years of Jim Crow laws that have segregated communities and redlining and a lot of those things. And there I think there is an aspect of being great at the thing that you do. Um, I think you have a good point with the Blind Side. I think that another movie that illustrates the point of hardworkedness and self-made man would be The Pursuit of Happiness.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite movies because that's just such a solid representation of you can do anything if you work hard enough and you keep your mind to it and you strive for it.
Yeah. The book that I just finished reading was Stamped from the Beginning. Have you heard of Ibram X. Kendi?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love his stuff. And I've actually been on YouTube and watched videos of people just bashing him. And because I'm, again, trying to stay as objective as possible. But he does bring up these movies that I thought were great. But just whatever the intention was, I don't know. But it just keeps pushing this narrative that you need to work your ass off to become extraordinary. And I don't know if I love that movie too, but I don't know if that narrative is useful for people in those situations, because maybe in these first world countries, I don't know what you call them, but the suicide rate is that much higher than poorer countries, right? Like, have you read that statistic? And one of the, I think, leading theories behind that is actually that you live in a country where you don't most of your basic, usually all your basic needs are met, and you have a roof over your head and yada yada. And when you're still not happy, it must be you. You know what I mean? And then they blame themselves. Reading that book, he mentioned a few movies, and this is where it started to get a little, for me, I'm like, is this a conspiracy theory? Like, is the media all out to get black people? And so, like, I don't know. History has kind of proven that it is, whether it's intended to or not. Another movie was the original Tarzan, where this white guy's thrown in the jungle and has to fight off black African people and apes and whatnot, or whatever. But when you match the movies to the time period, it does kind of make sense. Like, I know during the Cold War, and this is, I didn't read this or anything, I'm just remembering. No, I wasn't born during the Cold War. When was the Cold War?
Cold War was 1970s.
Okay, but
no, in that era,
definitely
like
it wasn't.
90s.
Yeah, but movies from that period, right? Weren't the villains usually like Russians?
Yeah. Like always.
Yeah.
What is it, like Die Hard? All of those. There was that stream of movies where, I believe that's a more like that's definitely a deliberate othering of the people that our country or our media currently sees as the issue they're having to deal with. So, like you said, it was like in the middle of the late 1900s was Cold War, and then after that it was like Afghanistan terrorists, Taliban. That's kind of where we moved into, was like Russian bad guy, the blonde dude from Rocky, into like Afghani terrorists.
Yeah. Well, Rocky's another one. There is one where he knocks the shit out of like the black dude is the final boss, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that was a sign of the times too. King Kong as well. Like, this white girl goes to a jungle and there's this big ape that she has to tame, and at the time, even to this day, racists will compare black folk to monkeys and apes and stuff. And I don't know, man. When I'm reading these like about these movies and stuff, and now let's go back to Rocky. Now it's like Creed is the sequel to Rocky. Have you
Mhm.
seen any of those?
No.
Well, Creed was the Russian dude knocked out the Apollo Creed, who was the black boxer, and he killed him in the ring.
Hmm.
And then now Apollo Creed's son, something Creed. It's like the new Rocky movies, and
Right.
then
Okay.
again, it's like a sign of the times. Like let's put a black face on the screen now, and they're the hero now. And I don't know if I'm for or against it. I'm just saying, like, the media kind of shows this pattern as well of like who's the good guy and who's the bad guy now. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Um, yeah,
I do think with the King Kong example, I think that goes deeper. I think that goes a lot deeper than skin deep. What is it? The five. So in erotica, in women erotica, not women erotica, but in erotica books, the top five male protagonist interests. I think I'm not sure if I'll remember all of them. Vampires, werewolves, doctors, pirates, and one other thing. And so there's this idea of like, it's Beauty and the Beast. It's that
yeah,
archetypal
yeah,
story of
yeah.
taming something, and not necessarily it being due to race, but being able to tame a mate and have them go from this brutish, strong, angry male into a nice, sensitive guy. And I mean, I've seen this so many times with my friends where they'll start dating someone that's changeable. Is the idea, is
Mhm.
the principle behind that, is that it's someone that you can change into a better person because you see this other side of them. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from. And with I mean, a lot of the time these conversations make me think, like, why do we watch movies? Why do we, there has to be something behind it to be willing to sit down for 2 hours and put 2 hours into this thing. Why do we watch movies? Why do we watch TV shows? And it's playing out this story. Nobody wants to see someone go from, like, you're at the top of this, you're at the pinnacle and you just maintain. People want to see someone that they can relate to. So lots of people want to see someone like Harry Potter, where he's just this poor orphaned kid in an unruly family that hates him, and he becomes the chosen one, this person, and that's someone that we can relate to. He goes through this alchemical journey and becomes the best version of himself. And,
Mhm.
and I think that that's what we like. I wonder what would happen if we were to, I mean, obviously there's tragedy, there are tragedy films that we could watch that don't have the hero's journey framework. But I think a lot of the time we watch, all of the Disney movies are based on that framework of the hero's journey of entering this new landscape where you're new to everything and you have no idea what's happening, but you're chosen in some way. And then you go through this journey where you face adversity and meet new friends and retrieve this hidden knowledge that you're able to bring back to your people, that you can create a better world from learning and from being in this journey. And I and that's all of that's through Brothers Grimm as well. And any fairy tale going back, any story going back, is this journey of going up and down a little bit and coming back up and finding a rebirth of yourself. And I think that's why people watch films and TV shows, is to have a framework. Because I think that's deep in our minds, is that we want this thing, we've seen this thing happen, we know the hero, we want to become the hero, and having a visual representation of that while also entertaining allows us to dive into that visually as well as philosophically.
Yeah, I well, maybe let me like some of the shit I've been watching lately. Obviously, the pendulum is swinging, and um, people are asking for representation
Mm-hmm.
and so on in the media. but from my perspective, when I watch some of these shows, it's just blatantly obvious that they're just throwing in these extra people um, to diversify their cast.
Hmm.
So like, a great example was this show on Crave. It's based on a book. It's this flight. I think it's called The Flight Attendant,
Hmm.
right? And um, the main character is a white girl. She's a flight attendant, and then the premise is that she wakes up after being super drunk and she's killed the guy that she slept with, or he's dead anyway.
Hmm.
But then her brother is gay with two adopted black children, and then her her three flight attendant friends, like um, I think Venezuelan or something, a black girl and a gay black guy, and it's just like, and these side stories, they're not even side stories, but this one woman, she's an FBI agent, and she's black, and her partner is a white guy, and she just throws in there somehow. And this is obviously their script. Is that, like, do you know what I had to do to get here? Yada yada. I'm like, I just had to laugh because I'm like, this whoever wrote this show just threw that in there to like, and the only people that are seeing that and getting something from it are white people. They're probably like looking at that. I mean, oh look, they're getting something. You know what I mean? It's like no person of color, no gay person is looking at that and like, we did it. You know what I mean? Like, we
Hmm.
have our stories being shown. So I see that a lot, and I just have to, even some of the stuff I see, um, like I see a lot of companies doing, well, let me even just say, like, the not Black History, the Black Lives Matter street that they did by the White House or something.
Yeah.
I see stuff like that, and um, like, that's nice, but it's not changing anything. You know what I mean? It's like, I think it's actually kind of a distraction of the root problem, which I think is racist power and racist policies.
Hmm.
Um, and like that we had on Instagram, the Blackout Tuesday and all that stuff. They're just kind of useless distractions almost.
Well, a lot of it's to build awareness because,
Yeah.
like, if you, I mean, that's the, I agree that there's this argument between what are you looking to achieve and what are you really doing, and to bring people in, a great way to do that is art. And we have so many visual medias now where, I mean, I wouldn't say that that's anything that belongs in the Louvre is like box letters, but it allows people to see this thing and know, okay, I'm not the only one thinking that. Like, I think
Mm.
that's a huge benefit of social media, and potentially a huge negative of social media is that you can really find things, you can find almost anything that will help you to get further into your cause. And so art and social movements where, like, I see it consistently now. Every week there's some kind of new blank day where you're posting a thing about um, whatever, dogs and best friends and people of color, and I mean, even I would say that a lot of it should get sprinkled in more in, like, in the broader scheme of things. I think there should be more incorporation of different perspectives in education as well.
Hmm.
In that, like, I can't believe I had no idea who Frederick Douglass was until I kind of sucked that out and read his book. I And there are lots of other examples along those lines. My girlfriend is really big into Indigenous culture, and she wants to find a way to teach a curriculum using exclusively Indigenous authors. And I think she comes to this issue a lot of the time is that there's this I think there's a lot of gatekeeping where
Hmm.
if a white person wants to use an indigenous author, they need, like, it becomes a little bit taboo even to talk about any indigenous issues if you're not indigenous, or to talk about black issues if you're not black. And I think that there's, I don't know, it's weird. It's super weird to me that we can't have a collective knowledge base and share that more fluidly. I think there are a lot of walls that disable that. And I want to
I,
know what you think about that.
yeah, no, you've actually touched on a great point that here's, so objectively you are right, but um, if you can wrap your head around this one concept,
Mm-hmm.
and um, to my definition of racism, I do think it's racist, but um, some people believe there's no anti-white racism. I don't actually know um, where I stand on the definition, and I would like to chat about that too. But I can understand how a black person can say, "I hate white people." I can't understand how a white person can say, "I hate black people," because what have they ever done to you as a people? Now, this was said to me by a friend, and at first it's like, shit, man, like that goes against what I intuitively think. But
Mm-hmm.
even as we talk as a people, that now you're getting into the roots of racism, which is even just um like you look at indigenous cultures and stuff too, like historically just been oppressed and oppressed and oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to classify people into their races, which is what was done by white people to benefit them, uh, and now it doesn't, and we want um, these to be less talked about. It's just like just put yourself into um, one of these people's shoes and be like, now you want to, it's like, oh, now you want to talk kind of thing. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand actually how hard it is to try and get that perspective through. Um, but when you've lived in a society that really benefits being white, and people have protested, people have died to try and just live well, not even be better off, not even be better than, or just live well. There's just a huge lack of trust there. And um, I think there are a lot of white folk out there who have really good intentions, but again, it's just a barrier that it's just going to be there when you're trying to converse with these communities. Like there's in Tonga, where my dad was born, and Christianity is now intertwined with our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's quite sad, and I would never say this to my parents because they're so devoutly a part of the church. But missionaries came, white people came and said, "You're savages." Where they erased our tattoo culture, which is now being revived. Took away our rituals. Same things happened to Indigenous folk in Canada. So just stuff has been taken away by
Mm-hmm.
white people to these communities. So there's just a huge lack of trust whenever whenever a white person says like, okay, let's get to working together, I always think of anti-racism kind of like becoming Jewish. And I don't really know about becoming Jewish, but I know that you have to be
It's
denied
hard.
again and again,
Yeah.
and finally you get through. And that's kind of how I think of it.
Hmm. I think you're right. I think there's a huge lack of trust between groups, and especially people that have been historically oppressed. I do believe there's a big like, well, why? What are you doing now? Like, why do you want to help now? And I think there's I think there could be some danger in specifying an individual based on their group identity. Like I think that's essentially what, to me, that's an idea within racism, is that you're making all of these generalizations about an individual based on the way that they look. And I think that works both ways. I think that works in, like, it's I think that it's a really tough thing to talk about because there's so much contention around the issue. And and the way that I see it is that it does become very limiting to categorize someone based on their group identities, like to group all males together and all black people together and all white people together and all women together and all indigenous populations together. I think that it in some way can set back a progress, maybe. Like I tend to look at people as individuals themselves, and I try not to make assumptions based on their group classifications. But obviously I could be, in some eyes, seen as wrong for doing that. And that's a tough thing for me, is working through that.
Yeah, well, um, I used to think the same way, but let me let's try and look at this from
Hmm.
an indigenous perspective. And you have the Indian Act, right, which
Hmm.
is like one of the most racist, patriarchal pieces of legislation um, in the world, definitely in Canada. And um, they tried to get rid of it, right? I
Hmm.
mean, the act itself has changed over the past, whenever it was implemented, I think in the 1800s, maybe even earlier. Um, and they tried to get rid of it. I think Pierre Trudeau tried to get rid of it with the white paper. And even though that this act is still like really hindering Indigenous people, they don't want to get rid of it, because if you get rid of the act, if you get rid of the differentiation of a status Indian,
Hmm.
which legally is the term, then they lose any bargaining power that they have.
Hmm.
And this is just from a legal sense, because right, I think the Indigenous struggle in Canada, and what Canada has done to Indigenous people, it's so shameful. um, I think it's, reading about it, it's like one of the most, it is the most embarrassing thing to Canada, and Canada's done such a good job of sweeping it under the carpet.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digress. If we, what I'm trying to say is, if we remove these identities, um, those groups, minority groups,
Hmm.
lose their bargaining power, right?
Hmm.
And whether or not it's, people argue towards it's a race issue, it's a class issue. Um, it's just undeniable that minorities as a group struggle.
Hmm.
And so, um, can we get to a point where we don't need them? I would argue, do we want to? And I don't know, maybe in a legal sense, you do want to, because then economically, in a true meritocratic society, then everyone is equal, and you can still hold on to your cultural identities, but maybe it just doesn't mean that identity doesn't entail struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I do think right now, getting rid of group identities in particular, and the intersections of these groups, is actually quite, I think it would be harmful.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I don't think
Yeah.
that group identities should be gotten rid of at all. I think that I think it's very, very important to have group identities and to be affiliated with particular groups, both religiously and through ethnicity. I've found that to be very pungent through, because I don't really have a deep tie to my family history. I'm Irish and Scottish. I have an indigenous great grandfather on my dad's side, and I have all these areas that I don't know, and it's something that my girlfriend has a little bit more of, but not as much as she could, and so there is this connection to family and land and home and culture and place that I don't think should be overlooked in the slightest. My main point is judging people based on their group identities and affiliations.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it's at for me.
Sorry, bro, you just cut out a little.
I totally understand your point, though. I think that I hope that Indigenous populations will get more autonomy in Canada as this fight continues, because I think that they've proved themselves as stewards of the land, and like there should absolutely be a more prominent Indigenous voice in decision making, because I've talked with my girlfriend about this a few times, because the more that I've dove into Indigenous literature and also South American literature of before Cortez, um, we lost so much valuable information through the decimation of culture and colonialism that took place, that it really it makes me unbelievably sad. I think that's one of the things that if I were to have any decision in history, it would be to retain that knowledge and history and culture, because so much of it is just gone and lost for forever, which is crushing. I think that's one of the greatest atrocities, is what happened to the culture and land and information that was lost with those tribes and those peoples.
Yeah. On the decision making part, in New Zealand, we do have, in Parliament, a Maori party, and so Maori are the Indigenous New Zealanders, and they're given a certain amount of seats in Parliament to, again, like, uphold that culture and have that representation. I think Jordan Peterson was on an Australian talk show,
Mm-hmm.
and they were talking identity politics and representation, and I'd like to hear what you think about this too. But he doesn't believe in representation. He made the analogy to bricklayers. He's like, 90-something% of bricklayers are men. Do they need representation? Or do women need to be equally represented? And I don't know. I think that's a pretty weak analogy. And people in positions of power, like, affect the entire population. And he might be right that just putting a woman in power doesn't mean that women will succeed, right? But
Mhm.
I think the people in power have to understand the needs of particular groups, and it's just more likely that a woman would understand what women need. But
Mhm.
it just being a woman doesn't mean you do. And same for Black representation. People really like to um, highlight uh, Black people that say what they agree with and really put them on this pedestal. There's a guy like Thomas Sowell. He's an economist or something, but he's a big voice on. He thinks the reason for racial disparity is individuals and Black culture being inferior, basically, and that's um, completely against what um, I don't even want to say believe, just what I've studied, because I don't want to
Mhm.
say I believe in something because it kind of entails that I am putting faith into it.
Yeah, just to clarify on the soul's point, his his main thesis for the book that he made that argument in is that in Eastern Britain, there were already rednecks that ended up coming and predominantly landing themselves in the southern United States, which is where that culture stemmed from. And so he's saying that that British culture is outdated. But I understand your point is that like, you can't say that a way that someone uses their language, or I actually just read this book called The Language Instinct by Steve Pinkner, and he talks about how actually correct a lot of the language that people have over the decades considered to be like hood talk, um, and
Yeah.
like thug lingo. And he talks about how grammatically correct it is. He's like, language isn't
Mm-hmm.
dying; like it evolves with people, and it evolves through groups. And so to have a language that you're able to use with your group is really important, and that portrays your cultural identity. And what Souls is saying is that that's all coming from a different place. It wasn't born here. It was born somewhere else, and then curtailed here and created into a more live picture.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't read any. I've just seen clips of him talking on YouTube, and
Mhm.
now my it's funny. Like uh, I, uh, I consider myself an anti-racist and try my best. Like that's kind of a title I have bought into, um, and I know that there's been backlash over that term, whatever. But my YouTube algorithm is like completely on the other side,
Mhm.
and it's all these people totally arguing
Yeah,
against what I'm like what I'm reading and stuff.
right. Which I think is good. I think you should really balance the information that comes into you, or else people just become ideologues where it's like you constantly have this confirming bias where everything that you watch confirms what you were thinking, and there's nothing that sways you either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember last time when we talked, um, we were talking about, and which I listened to on audiobook, but I actually want to read it again, that White Fragility book,
Hmm.
because I've read a lot of backlash on it, and um, yeah, I like remind me your issues with the book, and I'd love to chat on that. But
Oh, I read that so long ago.
yeah, like what I remember from it is just it is kind of a utilitarian view, and that like in order for things to stabilize, like other people have to suffer,
mhm.
or like white people need to. I don't know if it really gave any ways of white people actually opening conversations either.
I I think that it essentially closed a lot of conversations.
Mm,
The way that she frames a lot of her arguments and the way that she portrays herself. So she talks a lot about going and teaching anti-racism to corporations
mm,
and trying to eliminate bias. and like implicit bias, which is, I think the data is clear enough that you can't eliminate implicit bias. You can find ways to I don't know, once something's implicit at about 23, your brain hardens to the point where like you're not as prone to propaganda or all these other things, but in that way implicit bias also solidifies. And that's essentially what she's trying to do. But anytime someone argues a point, her main counter argument is just like you're fragile white, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like there's no open dialogue between the people that she's attempting to teach, and so I think that what ends up happening is that it fosters more of a discrepancy in perspective, because these people that she talks to, they're saying like well, I'm Italian, and Italians were treated very poorly for large parts of our history, and well, I'm Irish, and we were more or less like wage slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire time she's just saying, well, no, that doesn't matter, that doesn't matter, you're white, it doesn't matter what your family history has been, what matters is that you're white. And so I think for lots of people, I think that actually fuels the fire of othering,
Mm-hmm.
because lots of these people say, well, if we're building the argument of being, if we build this argument that this victim argument, not, I wouldn't, victim's almost too strong of a word, but if we build this argument that says my ancestors have experienced this thing, so I in turn have some kind of right to make this argument, and someone else comes and says, well, my ancestors also experienced this thing, and saying, well, no, because of this.
Yeah. I've seen this dude, something Weinstein. He's always on Joe Rogan, but he wrote a big letter about kind of denouncing Black Lives Matter and saying, comparing to being Jewish. I don't really, man. Jewish people have been through a shit ton of stuff, eh? Like
They've been through the ringer since the beginning.
Of course, yeah, and but it is a weird comparison to make right now, and maybe it actually adds to your argument of these histories, like what is happening right now to black. It's the same. They all should be fighting for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I do think in America, if you look at movements, minority movements, I struggle with the word minority just because it does kind of make it sound like lesser than, I don't know, but I don't have any better word. Anyways, they all have kind of been inspired, or they all have been inspired by Black rights movements.
Mm-hmm.
The women's movement was inspired by the emancipation movement or abolitionist movement. They kind of all stem from it, and obviously women still struggle. The LGBT community still struggles, but I do think having white people in that group has progressed those movements quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have empirical evidence for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but even yeah, no, actually, I don't want to talk too much on stuff I'm not even educated on. So
well, I mean, even the Emancipation Act, like the huge portion of the people that voted for Lincoln and the people that in the north of the United States that fought for the emancipation of the African population were like those were white people.
Hmm.
Like it's not that black and white people have been at each other's throats for the entire history of the earth or for the entire history of the United States. Like there have been there it's more or less ideologies that people fall into, and like we've worked together for this
Hmm.
entire time, and it's not as if we're two completely separate groups. And like you
Yeah.
said, a lot of those groups that have acquired autonomy, more autonomy in their lives through the suffrage movement and the emancipation, um, like a lot of those were interconnected groups that were going together with each other. They
Hmm.
weren't, it wasn't like one group of people fighting for this thing. It was a conglomerate of people, a series of individuals that made up this change.
Hmm. Yeah. I but no, but again, it's always needed white people to push it. Um, like black people have tried to empower themselves or build their own communities, and they've always been struck down, whether it's from the government or the KKK. Um, um, Same as the Indigenous struggle in Canada, which it actually amazes me. The more I read into this stuff, it's like um, that Canada is again has just done such a good job of covering it up
Yeah.
and
Well,
kind of.
there's still bands that don't have clean drinking water.
Mhm. Well, Flint, Michigan just got clean water, I think, in the States.
Really? Hmm.
It's America. It's America, and they don't have. It was up to celebrities
Yeah.
to. Well, that's just kind of encapsulates the states, right? Like to get drinking water, you needed celebrities and GoFundmes. But
Yeah.
um, the so I had a conversation um, with uh, with my girlfriend's family the other night, and it's really got my head turning and stuff. And it's funny, like you're in your bubbles. And last summer, I was in. We we started the UBIAA, and we had all these. They were basically support groups for Black and Indigenous, or any athlete of color, but mainly Black and Indigenous athletes that showed up. And finally they had this medium to share their experiences on what's happened to them, um, and just be heard and be validated.
Hmm.
And obviously the BLM movement blew up over social media, and that was my world. But I've been in these rooms with white families a lot lately, moving back to Canada, moving out to Toronto. And uh, last year I was like, wow, like things are changing. I was really optimistic, enthusiastic, and um, now I'm a little cynical. I understand changes takes a very long time to create, and I'm kind of over interpersonal interpersonal stuff on the topic of race. And what I mean by that is
You cut out.
Sorry, dude. The
No, that's fine.
Wi-Fi is shut. What was I even saying?
You were talking about interpersonalness in race.
Yeah. So uh, there is this like, let's talk like slacktivism on Instagram is people posting things on their stories and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I kind of classify it as interpersonal or like conversations uh, I might have with someone. I just think, especially being a person of color, talking to a white person, socially, the white person has more social power in that they can ask me 10 questions that they have no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
And the um, like that I even have to explain that all is so draining.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even imagine being an indigenous person or a black person having those same questions shot at them. It's like um, the other night there was a conversation and it was like about how the Washington Redskins got rid of their name, and the question was asked: "Is Cleveland Indians okay?" Like that's not offensive, right? And like immediately just shot so many things in my head that it's just the fact that that question is being asked. Just it's like that Venn diagram. Like we're on total different planets
Mm-hmm.
because, and two of the people in the conversation were arguing over. Like one of them said, "Well, Indians only became offensive uh, recently," and the other girl saying like Indian was they used it because they thought they were landing in India, yada yada. And I was kind of asked, and I was like, just the fact that white people are arguing over it is just a whole other book. We're not
Mm-hmm.
even on the same page. And it's like one of the girls was like, well, my textbooks had in she's in her 40s or 50s, and exactly like your textbooks said it, so then it must be right. That is what it's like to be white, is that your history or white history has been written by white people.
Mm-hmm.
So you trust your textbooks
Yeah.
mostly, right? Indigenous history has never had the opportunity to be told from that perspective. And so
Mm-hmm.
how can we have that conversation right now? It just, of all the things we talked about the other night, and I've kind of opened these discussions because I want to hear that perspective. And I've told people in our support groups, don't go telling when there's a lot of organizations that are like, I want our Black employees to share their experiences with us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We saw a lot of that, or Indigenous, or insert person of color. And what we've kind of been telling them is don't stop doing that. You're not getting anything out of it. Right. You're pouring your heart out to people who don't get it. And what are you getting out of it? So we had people being asked to speak at corporate events and stuff like that without being paid. When you get someone to speak at something like that for a company, they're always paid.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, when it's sharing your experiences as a person of color, we want you to do it, and we're not going to pay you, and this is all for you. Like this is your problem. You know what I mean? So where I'm kind of at is, if I'm not going to get anything out of the conversation, I don't really want to talk about it.
Mhm.
I'm much more interested in changes in structure, changes in power and policy.
Mhm.
And a lot of people that have been doing this work, like I'm very barely scratching the surface of this stuff, but people who have actually doing their masters um, and doing theses on this and stuff, I can see that they've gotten to that place uh, kind of the same way that I have. You become a little. It is very tiring, this kind of this stuff, and thinking about it, and it does get, you do get pretty mad. And I think right now have that magnifying glass on North America, and if I take that off and look at the globe, we have child labor, we still have slavery, we have all this other stuff, and my head is not ready for that, man.
Yeah.
Like, and I think once I do open that scope, um, it'll be very humbling. Um, but I admittedly am not ready for that, and am being quite ignorant to it because I cannot take that on.
Mhm. How do you think, like I've found that my best way of understanding is through reading a lot of accounts and understanding the things that have actually happened in the past, and discussing with people that have experienced these things in the present. And so that's the way that I've experienced my perspective change on a lot of these things. And I've come to believe that we experience macro change through the micro, and in like individual change aids in the things that you were talking about, policy and power. So I absolutely understand that it's tiring to discuss these things and to put yourself out there. And I also understand the philosophy of not wanting to do something unless you're getting something from it. Like I totally think that that's right on. Like I don't think that people should be providing a service without being compensated. Um, sorry, my dogs are,
It's all good.
yeah. So I think that's where I am a little bit disconnected from that. Is that how does macro change happen if we don't make micro change?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know. Let's explore it. Where I'm at with that is, I would much rather put my energy into empowering communities of color,
Mm-hmm.
especially Indigenous communities in Canada. Um, the How does the macro change happen without micro? It doesn't, and we've seen protests and stuff, and I think that's sparked from individual conversations, and
Mm-hmm.
has grown out. But I just don't think, um, and you're hitting on what has been spinning through my head the last month, 2 months. That how do you get those ideas put into power,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do you change racist policies? Um, yeah, I don't know. We saw people, right? We saw grassroots movements in the States push Native American communities to get out and vote. We saw grassroots Black initiatives to get Black communities out to vote. and so that's, I think, where maybe that micro change comes in, that bottom up, right? Because that's where the power is with um, individuals, where it should be is voting, and where their money is. Like, you can hit people in their wallets. Yeah, I don't know. I think if we solve that, we solve a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. And it is fun to kind of speculate. And um, I agree with you that as much power as the media has, I think it really backfired on them, pushing liberal views. I think I was talking to my girlfriend about this yesterday. I was like, as much as this movement has really brought oppressed voices to the table, I think it has strengthened those opposing views.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that it's not an equal rise, but what we saw at the Capitol last month is probably a great example of that. None of those views are popular media, but they had enough. They felt that they were oppressed and thought that they had the right to do that. The more I watch that, and the more I think about the insurrection, I'm actually just blown away that everything that went into it. Like the lack of police compared to BLM protests.
Yeah.
Even just I'll tell you, I have zero sympathy for anyone that was there.
Mm-hmm.
I can empathize. I can understand. I have no sympathy though. But for them to be that passionate about something, right? They must really believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to change an individual on that side's perspective through conversations and stuff, I think it's inefficient. I don't think, again, people are using the same words but speaking different languages.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was referring to earlier, where this silent majority, not even majority, but like 50% of the nation, like
Yeah,
we're pretty cut down the middle between Republicans and Democrats, at least in the
yeah.
States, and then in Canada too. I mean, the Conservative Party won the majority, and they still didn't get in. But with that is like there's this consistent othering, and as you said in the Capitol, that was discussed earlier, that was pre-planned, all of that was premeditated, like it was an idea, and this group of people think that they feel oppressed enough to do something like that. And and right now what I see is that just groups yelling at each other. There's no dialogue back and forth of how we can kind of recuperate a relationship and create bridges between the ideas. It's more of a you're wrong for this reason and you're wrong for this reason, and there's no attempt to find middle ground, which is something that I'm like my goal is to do podcasts with as many people as I can from differing perspectives, because it's something that I really want to understand, is how to bridge that gap between people and undivide not just a country but people in themselves.
Mm-hmm. I I I'm looking forward to maybe one day looking back at this talk and seeing how much my views have changed and
Mm-hmm.
how much I've contradicted myself, maybe. Um, but what you're doing is quite special in that you want to get different views. Um, I used to watch a decent amount of Joe Rogan.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see some problems in his podcast because he thinks of himself as quite an objective person, and he obviously has a lot of conservative voices, and I guess he he claims that he has a lot of different views, but I'm seeing it move more and more one-sided into like right-leaning, or even maybe just this this COVID pandemic, wherever you're at with it. I haven't seen anyone on his show say masks are good. Like I've seen clips on YouTube, they just come up and it's like how lockdowns and stuff are detrimental to society and whatever. I'm I'm a regular ass person. I don't know what is going on with this pandemic. I don't know. I think it's really funny to me when average ass people try to mansplain this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's, there are so many variables, and I can totally understand mistrust in the government, but I just can't understand anyone having an expert opinion on this unprecedented time for anyone living right now.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I find most interesting about it is that you can easily argue for either side. With the lockdowns, I think that strict lockdowns have been proven successful, like New Zealand, Australia, to like just perfect examples of something where a closed system with strict lockdowns and finding outbreaks and locking down around them, like they're living a normal life right now.
Mm-hmm.
And also cultures that are mask wearing naturally before the pandemic, such as Japan and Korea. A lot of that's more cultural in that, like, if you're sick, you just wear a mask. So people have just worn masks, and the pandemic hasn't had as much of an effect. And I think that the more free flowing and larger nations, like I think the EU is going to have difficulty with this for a long time because it's so hard to close borders, because that's the idea behind the EU is relatively free travel. So to lock people down is tough. And same with America, where you can travel the whole country, and it's a huge country, and same with Canada. So I really think that depending on which way you look at it, you can argue for either way. Yes, it's destroying an economy to lock down. Also, it'll save an economy if you lock down sooner and deal with the problem and completely reopen and not have to go through continuous lockdowns. I don't know. My grandma and I talked about this a while ago, and she was complaining about how totalitarian everything is. I'm like, well, other countries have done this and succeeded, so it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't do it and succeed. It's that the people aren't willing enough to do it and succeed, and it's at an individual level as well.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine trying to do what New Zealand did in the States?
Yeah, because like it's landlocked on either side. So there's people that can go through borders, and
Mm-hmm.
like New Zealand, I think that island nations have it the easiest for this, like Korea, Japan,
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand, Australia. All of those have like control over their bubble of people coming in, and they can put them into hotels so that they can quarantine for 14 days. Whereas we don't really have that privilege in Canada, America, Mexico, like that. Those
Yeah,
three.
or or all the infrastructure governmentally, like New Zealand is has a lot of government funding and stuff. So when we go later this year, the government's paying for my hotel room, which I
Mm-hmm.
understand is probably a couple grand or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, whereas America, you again probably need celebrities to fund some hotels and share their money out. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. I um, I think a lot of people are really burnt out from this, and um, there are people who I've talked to who give me their sob stories, and I this is paradoxically, I hate complaining, but when I say that, I'm complaining about complaining. But what people have gone through in this pandemic, there's always someone worse off than you, man. And yeah, I am extremely grateful that my girlfriend's family took me in, and I've been watching my dog while Greece, and we have like a family here. And we have the dogs. We can take the dogs for a walk. But even someone who is still privileged in the sense that they have a roof over their head and a job and stuff, even those people are just stuck inside a room all day and going stir crazy. And then I know back home in New Zealand, from my neighborhood, I heard of kids dropping out of high school so they could get a job and provide for their family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like really hard for me sometimes at the dinner table to hear some complaints and whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to complain and stuff, but there's only so much you can listen to.
Yeah, it's tough. Everyone's been hit to different extents, so it's easy for everyone to put forth their voice and say, I've been impacted in this way, where, just like you said, anyone that you look at in the entire world, there's someone that has it worse, except for the person that has it worst. That probably wouldn't be fun to be that guy. All right, do you want to cut there?
Yeah, man.
Okay, I'll stay on for a few minutes just to say bye, but okay, I'm cutting it now.
Sweet.
Thanks for coming on, man. Every time we talk, I have, like, my entire mind changes, my perspectives change, and it's just a ton of fun to have you on. So, okay, I'm cutting it now. Bye.
Sweet.